Welcome back to Digby for Bell & Lyon TV1's continuing coverage of the 2016 Everest Canadian Senior Curling Championship. I'm Scott Squires here with you on Sheet B. It's the final draw of today, the final draw before we get into the semifinals and final tomorrow. And a great matchup here between Ontario, skipped by Brian Cochrane, and Team Nova Scotia, skipped by Alan O'Leary. Ontario, a record of 8-1. Nova Scotia, a record of 7-2. Ontario, the only blemish on their record came this morning, an 8-2 defeat at the hands of British Columbia. British Columbia really seems to be on a roll right now, hitting on all cylinders, although they had a bit of a issue with their third, suffering a troublesome knee, but he'll get some rest tonight, should be okay for tomorrow. And for Nova Scotia, well, they really came out firing on all cylinders, went undefeated through the first 7 draws before a 7-6 loss to Saskatchewan. And then this morning, Manitoba actually handed it right to Nova Scotia, a 10-1 pasting. Nova Scotia losing to to Manitoba, but all that out the window now. Final game for both of these teams. Manitoba has already played their 10 games with a record of 8-2, currently sitting in second in the men's championship pool. And Ontario and Nova Scotia playing out the string here, and still a little bit of jockeying for position. We know that BC, Nova Scotia, Manitoba, and Ontario will be the 4 teams in the semifinal tomorrow, but we just don't know exactly who will be playing who and what the seedings will be. Again, that will be determined once we know the outcome of this particular game. So as you can see, Ontario throwing red rocks here, and Nova Scotia throwing yellow. Both of these teams have played very well, but both teams have also suffered fairly big losses in terms of point differential, but sometimes those things can happen. You can have a little dip. So there you see Alan O'Leary, the skip for Nova Scotia, just checking whether or not that rock was infringing upon the top part of that 12. This Alan O'Leary rink, and the skip Alan winning the Canadian Senior Men's Championship back in 2014 and captured silver at last year's World Senior Men's. So Nova Scotia looking to get back to the podium here. Alan O'Leary, I'm sure, would love to do that on home soil here in Nova Scotia, capture the championship in Digby. Alan O'Leary, the skip of this Nova Scotia team. The vice, Andrew Dauphney. Danny Christensen, the second, and Harold McCarthy throwing lead rock. And for Ontario, Brian Cochrane, as mentioned, the skip. Ian McCauley is the vice. Doug Johnston, the second. And Ken Sullivan throwing lead rock for the team from Central Canada. Team Ontario wearing the white with black and red trim. You see them there. Should be in for an epic battle between these two curling rinks, as that Ontario rock comes down and just gently taps on the Nova Scotia rock. Early stages here of this first and last draw. What a fantastic week of curling. We are excited to bring it to you, and we cannot wait for tomorrow. And O'Leary probably could have waited to have that miss, as that one goes flying by everything. So an early miss here in this end. See if Ontario can take advantage of it. Ontario, as you see in behind there, by virtue of closer to the button just prior to this game, gets the hammer, so they have last rock here in end number 1. And that is, for not everybody watching is an expert in curling and all the terminology, and I learn as I go along as well with a lot of these things. But sometimes you'll have folks that are watching family and may not be overly familiar with curling and the terminology, basically what the hammer is that it just signifies that a team will have the last rock. In other words, they will get to throw last in a particular end. And then the way that it works is that after the first end, where the two teams throw a rock, and whichever rock goes closest to the very middle part, called the button, gets the virtue of having the hammer or last rock, and then from there it's based on whoever scores points. So, for example, in this end, if Ontario scored points, that would give Nova Scotia the advantage of having last rock in the next end, and so on and so forth. So this Nova Scotia rock comes down, chips on its own, clears it away, and still wondering about that red Ontario rock that's just at the top of the 12-foot there. Ontario and Nova Scotia, again, great records coming in here. Both have played 9 games. And only 3 losses between the two of them. 1 for Ontario, 2 for Nova Scotia. And our feature game on Sheet D, with our good friend Jim Nix calling the action there. Nova Scotia taking on Alberta. Women's action. So here you see the setup. A couple of red Ontario rocks at the top of the house. You want to get on that one right away. There you see McCauley really working it. Cochrane out there as well. They tap it, trying to get it. I think they were trying to get it maybe to the back of that 8-foot, but they don't push it back as far as they wanted. So that's okay. Not a bad shot at all for Team Ontario. And now Alan O'Leary will call for his front end shot here. Andrew Dauphney, the vice for this team. Hailing from the capital city of Nova Scotia, Halifax. Gets the hit, and the shooter rolls out. Or does it? Well, it'll still hang around right there. Dug in at the end. O'Leary comes over to take a peek, as does Cochrane. Interesting as well, Brian Cochrane putting a whistle into play here. There you see it. He pops that whistle in his mouth. First time I've had the chance to call a game here this week with the Ontario foursome. If I had have seen that whistle before, I would have gone down to Brian and talked to him about it. See if that's just a kind of a superstition thing or if he puts it into use. We are on Twitter. You can send out a tweet on social media. Include my Twitter name in the tweet at Johsco. That's Johsco. Use the hashtag Everest Furby or TV1. That's the number 1. So again, a couple of Ontario Red Rocks splitting the rings. Andrew Dauphney now will settle in, get ready to throw his second. Nice crowd on hand here at the Digby Arena on a Friday evening, just past 6 o'clock in the evening here in Digby, Nova Scotia. That's Atlantic time. And Dauphney gets the hit and the roll over, and he'll sit there just above the tee line in the 4-foot. So a nice offering there from Dauphney. Ontario with the hammer here. Ian McCauley with the delivery. And you just heard a blow of the whistle. So So perhaps the blow of the whistle means that they need the front end to come onto it. And I will be honest, for me, I've watched a lot of curling over the years. I've called a fair amount of curling. I think that's the first time I've ever seen or heard a skip utilize the blast of a whistle. I hear whistles lots of times when I'm covering other sports, hockey, football, basketball. First time I've heard one being used by a curler on this curling sheet. So here is Alan O'Leary, originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's his city of birth, of course, in Nova Scotia now. And curling and representing proudly the province of Nova Scotia. Has played at the Canadian Junior Men's. He's been to a couple of Briers. Of course, we talked about his experience at the senior championship level. Alan works for Fernell Packaging Limited and is the plant manager there. First took up the game of curling when he was 13 years old. So there is Ian McCauley now in the rings calling ice for the skip, Brian Cochran. McCauley curled in the Brier back in 2003. A lot of Brier experience amongst the curlers here in the men's side of this senior curling event. And this first of two stones from the Ontario skip on its way. Going to look to bring it down and get it deep as he can in that corner, and it crosses the tee line and sits just on the back end of that tee line in the 12. So the rings are split here. Ontario rocks either side, as you can see. That tee line going right down the middle, and basically when you split the rings, what that means is that you've got some of your stones in the house on one side of the center line and a rock or more in the house on the other side, which makes it difficult for your opponent to deal with. It certainly reduces the chance of a double, in other words, two rocks being taken out at once. Alan O'Leary. Last rock here for the Nova Scotia skip. He'll come down, take that out. Now how much of a roll does he get across the face of the house? Nice shot there by O'Leary as he takes out the red Ontario rock and then gets a nice roll over. Glad that you're with us here, watching the 2016 Everest Canadian Senior Curling Championship live and exclusively on Bell Alliant TV1. And it's been great talking to a lot of the curlers and their families here in attendance enjoying this, and hearing lots of stories about family, friends watching this event from right across the world. Had one of the family members from the British Columbia team telling me that they had family down in Florida watching, and that they were enjoying it, but they were wondering about some of the curling terminology. Weren't exactly sure. The one in particular that came up was the hammer. They weren't quite sure what it meant if you had the hammer. Perhaps picturing something completely different. Maybe thinking that a curler came in with an actual hammer and actually hit those rocks. So Cochran drifts this one over And he will draw it in to score 2. So a nice job by O'Leary to bring that rock over and sit it in the back, but Cochrane pulls the trigger on the draw. And Ontario with the hammer, they score 2 in the first end. So we'll go to end number 2. Nova Scotia will have last rock, and they'll look to get on the board themselves. So this matchup between teams at the top of the table on the men's side. First blood drawn by Ontario. Ken Sullivan from Winchester, Ontario, as is the skip, Brian Cochrane. Sullivan watches his offering here. Cochrane coming out just to make sure that they get the positioning that they want. I'll bring that into the rings, and we'll stop right there. Alan O'Leary puts the brush down, and we'll call for this shot now from Harold McCarthy. There's McCarthy with his first shot here of this end. Harold from Halifax, Nova Scotia. Curls out of the Dartmouth Curling Club. Was part of that 2014 Senior Championship team, as well as the silver medal winning team. Ken Sullivan, the lead, prepares for his second delivery here in end number 2. Curling, an interesting game by times. And interesting, as I say, Ontario puts 2 on the board in the very first end, and that's the same amount of points that they scored in the entire game versus British Columbia. So sometimes you just never know. A lot of ebb and flows, a lot of changes, a lot of differences from one draw to the next. Sometimes you're on, sometimes you just can't get it going. Harold McCarthy now with his second here from the lead position. And do they squeak it by? No, they don't. Just gets a little rub off that Ontario red, and then we'll duck in behind that tee line sitting in the 8-foot. So Cochrane now looks like he's asking Christensen to take that yellow Nova Scotia stone out and maybe get a little roll to the inside. Christensen with his offering. Nice look at him there as he watches his shot go down. Gets the hit and the stick, so he'll stay right there. Takes out the Nova Scotia yellow. So a couple of Ontario rocks sitting in the house. Danny Christensen now attended Dalhousie University, a very well-known institution of higher education located in Halifax. Probably most well-known for its medicine and medical program. Absolutely beautiful campus right in downtown Halifax, and actually 2 very beautiful campuses right in downtown Halifax. Of course, Dalhousie University as well as St. Mary's University. St. Mary's probably more well known for its business and economics side of things. course, Bell Alliant TV1, very heavily involved with not only Dalhousie University and St. Mary's University, but all 11 member schools of Atlantic University Sport. Part of a 5-year partnership between Atlantic University Sport and Bell Alliant and TV1 to broadcast either online or via fiber optic TV1 every game, every varsity athletic game in the AUS. And I was certainly glad to be a part of that this past year. And of course, we'll be back with more Atlantic University sport action on Bell Alliant TV1 in September. And it'll be here before you know it. When you get old like me, time really flies. So a couple of rocks in play there, you see, is going right down that center line. 2 Ontario red rocks, and then over on that right side of your screen, that one Nova Scotia yellow, Alan O'Leary, as you see, placing the brush in behind there for Christensen. Dauphney and McCarthy providing the sweeping duties here. That is really starting to come over now. And it'll stop right there, but a pretty big swing on that rock the last few feet as it came over the hog line. And it will sit there as a guard just at the very top of that 4-foot zone above the top edge of the 12-foot. There's Cochran again. I'm so very curious as to why it is he employs that whistle. Almost want to run down and take off the headset and ask him. And you hear the little blast of it there. Looking to come in around. And maybe just freeze right up against that front rock there. Nice shot from Christensen. Seems to be a little more swing in this ice this evening than we saw earlier today, and kind of the same amount of swing we saw at the beginning of the week. A lot of movement in the ice here on Sheet B early in the week. Monday, Tuesday draws, it kind of straightened out a little bit midweek, but seems to have come back a little here in this, at least early stages of this draw. A very mild and moist day here in the Digby area. A lot of rain, a lot of moisture in the air. Working extra hard was the ice crew to take care of that humidity. And Dauphney comes down, jams on that one red, drives another Ontario rock out the back, and the shooter goes out as well. But the ice crew having to work extra hard today. You could see the condensation on the windows of the doors on the exterior of the arena. But overall, a fantastic job has been done here all week long by the ice makers and doing the upkeep in between all the draws. So, a Nova Scotia guard, fairly deep, and then 2 other Ontario rocks right up the center line in the house. McCauley, see that worn down spot on his right knee from that drag as he comes out of the hack. Everyone's got a different form, different style when they come out of the hack, but obviously McCauley leaning very heavily on that right knee. See that patch in his right knee, quite worn down from the slide when he comes out. Sullivan and Johnston now. Watch this one curl in. Is it going to bend enough? Now let's come over and freeze right up against another Ontario rock at the back of the 4-foot. Nova Scotia with last rock here in this end. Cochrane looking to set it up so that O'Leary's going to have a hard time getting multiple points. Trying to force him into maybe taking a single or even a steal here. Dauphney, a lot of experience as well. Played in a couple of Briars back in the 80s and 90s, and a couple of senior men's as well as a member of that senior men winning team in 2014 for Canada and the World Silver last year. And of course, the winner of the senior this year, both in the men's and women's side, will play in the World Senior Curling Championships 2017 in Lethbridge, Alberta. And a nice shot from Dauphney as he goes in around and brings it into that button. And will make it hard for Ontario to remove because it's got the backing of those two Redstones right in behind it. So nice touch there from the vice, Andrew Dauphney. Brian Cochrane, the whistle-wearing skip from this very talented Ontario team. Cochrane playing this out turn. Walks down with it. You see Sullivan and Johnston on the brushing. Quiet wait as it comes over that hog line. It'll really start to come in now. Curling in towards that forefoot, and we'll just freeze up right there. So, in effect, Cochrane causing a jam situation for Nova Scotia. In other words, with that Yellowstone in behind, even if O'Leary wanted to come down and hit on that red, he would only drive it back into the rocks in behind. And that red Ontario rock just thrown by Cochrane would be more harm than good for Nova Scotia. So there you see the brush placement from Dauphney for O'Leary. So O'Leary looks like he's going to come down that right side of the sheet from where he's throwing. The world silver medalist at the senior level from last year with his delivery here. Last rock for Nova Scotia in this end. Playing on home soil in front of a pro Nova Scotia crowd, as you may expect. Again, coming down, trying to bring it in. Got to get it by that red one. He does just squeak it by. And it'll sit right there. Maybe not as deep as he would have liked, but still a pretty nice looking shot. Pretty darn good weight from the Nova Scotia skip there. So a real cluster of rocks right around that forefoot, as you see. Brian Cochrane now talking things over with McCauley. Trying to see what they want to do. Wondering if there's any play on that red rock at the top of the four, perhaps. Don't think there's a play on that red rock at the top of the 12, sitting on the center line there. Cochrane seems confident now with the decision he's made and what he wants to do here. The Ontario skip with his final rock here in end number 2. Ontario leads 2-0. Lots of rocks in play here. Cochrane coming down that same side that O'Leary did moments ago. Again, just throwing a very quiet weight, trying to block any path for O'Leary to go in toward that middle. So there you go, Alan O'Leary. A lot of traffic in front, and right now, Nova Scotia is sitting one, but then everything else would be red. So no matter how many rocks you see, it's all dependent on whoever is closest to the very center point, or the button as they call it. Right now, the Nova Scotia rock sitting almost on the button obviously would be shot rock, in other words, 0.1. And then a couple of Ontario reds out around the outside. Certainly look to be second and third shot. Might be debatable as to what would be fourth rock right now between the red Ontario rock at the back of the four and the yellow Nova Scotia at the top. So it looks like O'Leary, taking lots of ice here, is going to come down that right side once again and try to bring it over toward the middle. Some of the curlers you'll notice wear gloves. Others go no gloves, bare hands, and that's the case with Skip O'Leary. You saw him wiping off the bottom of his rock there with the bare hand. So he's going with the in-turn draw here. Not touching it at all now. They come to it. Maybe he's going to come in and he's going to hit on that guard. He's going to wreck on that guard right there. Just now it's certainly one, and it is, yeah, it's a single point for Nova Scotia. O'Leary trying to come in around, but just didn't have the right line. And he wrecks on that Ontario guard in front. So Brian Cochran set it up to make it as difficult as possible for O'Leary to score points. And O'Leary forced to take the single with the hammer. So Nova Scotia does get a point, but they remain trailing 2-1 now. Ontario leads, and Ontario will take the hammer into the third end. So a nice end set up there by Brian Cochran. And O'Leary did the best he could. Tried to come around on his last shot, but just ticked on that guard in the front. And single point for Nova Scotia. So Nova Scotia now will throw first here. And Ontario will have last rock in this third end. Harold McCarthy gets us going here in end number 3. McCarthy shot starting to curl in now towards the center line, and will sit as a guard just about in the middle of that center line. So Nova Scotia comes out, putting a guard in play. We'll see now if Ontario plays into that guard game or if they want to avoid that altogether. Over at our feature game on Sheet D, women's action on the championship pool side. Alberta put 3 on the board in the second end, and they lead Nova Scotia and Colleen Jones by a score of 3-0. Nova Scotia with the hammer in the third end in that one. And here in our game, feature game on Sheet B, you see the scoreboard in the background. Ontario with 2 in the first, Nova Scotia 1 in the second. And we play here in the third, Ontario with the hammer. McCarthy watching that closely. It's over the hog line. Dauphney and Christensen work on it now. And Ontario brought their shot into the rings. Nova Scotia now does the same. So Cochrane will want that Nova Scotia rock out of there. And a couple of blasts from the skip's whistle. Johnston really working on it. Does he get the roll that he wants? Well, I think he hit it a little thicker than he wanted because he ended up taking that Nova Scotia rock, running it back onto his own, and the Ontario red rock spills out the back, and Nova Scotia now sitting one. Nova Scotia here, see if they can take advantage of that tiny miscue. They'll come down and take that Ontario rock out the back. So Nova Scotia now sitting two. So a little change of fortune within a couple of rocks. And only yellow in play right now, but still only early here in this third end. Cochrane calling for the shot. This one will come down fairly straight and look to take out that Nova Scotia rock. Starting to come over now. Do they get the angle on it? They do. And again, just not what Ontario wanted. They were on the rock that they wanted to be on, but hitting it just a little thin. And the Nova Scotia rock does move, but stays in, and the Ontario rock rolls out. So that's a couple of Ontario rocks now that have ended up going out of the house when that's not what they wanted to do. So a couple of small miscues here from Team Ontario in this end. Not sure if that's just trying to read the ice or what might be causing that. Very uncharacteristic of this Ontario team, certainly in this championship here this week. Only the one loss for Team Ontario. Nova Scotia draws into the house, and that yellow Nova Scotia rock will go just in behind the back part of the forefoot. Ontario once again with their shot, and Ontario with the hammer here in this third end. Battle at the top of the table on the men's championship pool side, just skirting by that guard at the front, and it'll come down and sit about 6 inches above that other Nova Scotia rock. Third end action here. These two teams trying to put one more win in the bank. Nova Scotia at 7-2, Ontario at 8-1. After this rock, as we see it clearing by that guard and now coming down, and will sit there at the top of the 8-foot. So Ontario at 8-1. Manitoba has played their final draw, 8-2. Nova Scotia 7-2. So if Nova Scotia beats Ontario, they would be at 8-2, as would Ontario, and Manitoba would be 8-2. So 3 teams at 8-2, and if Nova Scotia does win, all those 3 teams with the same record would have all beaten each other. So then it comes down to closest to the button percentage. And right now, based on just prior to this draw, if Ontario, Manitoba, Nova Scotia all finish with identical records, Ontario would stay in first, Nova Scotia and Manitoba would flip-flop. And Nova Scotia would be the second seed. Manitoba would be 3, so it would be Ontario, BC in the 1-4 game. Nova Scotia, Manitoba in the 2-3 game. But again, a lot to be determined should that be the case. Now, if Nova Scotia loses, they would be at 7-3, same as British Columbia, but head-to-head, Nova Scotia defeated British Columbia, so Nova Scotia would be the 3rd seed. So it would end up being Ontario versus BC in the 1-4 game, and Manitoba versus Nova Scotia in the 2-3. So again, a few things to be decided here in the seedings for the top 4 men's teams based on the outcome of this game. However, we do know, as I talked off the top, you see this shot coming down from Dauphin. I'll finish my thought after we see this shot finish its path. Want to get just a little piece of that red if they can. And they don't catch it. It ends up going into that little bit of a jam at the back and will sit right there. Ontario still shot rock. So again, we do know the 4 teams that will be in the men's semifinals tomorrow: Ontario, Manitoba, Nova Scotia, and BC. Now again, David Stevenson, the 3rd or vice skip, did have a bit of an issue with his knee. Nothing major, however, he did sit out their final game against Manitoba, a game in which Manitoba won 6-0. But I was talking to a couple of folks in and around the BC men's team and saying that David was going to be A-OK, just needed to rest that knee up a little bit, and he'd be fine to go in the morning. So McCauley with his throw here. And in number 3. Again, a lot of rocks in play, same as we saw the last end. Starts to curl over now, coming over towards that center line. Will it get by the guard? No, just barely ticks on that guard. So the curl over impeded by the little tick on the guard, but not a horrible situation for Ontario, as it will sit there between the 8 and the 12 foot at the top, but just barely a tick on that guard in the front. So again, just a mess of rocks right up the middle. Lots of red, lots of yellow, and there's a look at it. It's like one of those Warshack blots. What do you see? I see a dragon. And what Nova Scotia sees, as O'Leary talks it over with Dauphin, is a mess of rocks, and through it all, that one Ontario rock that you see just behind that center line, or the tee line, to the side of the center line, is shot. Which means that that would be the counting point right now if everything stopped and you counted up your points. So it all depends again on which rock is closest to the button, that center point in the rings. And again, of course, curlers and curling fans would know that, but some folks watching this, tuning in to watch Family and Friends, may not be as familiar with all of the rules of curling and the vernacular. We like to educate as well as entertain here on Bell Aligned TV1. So this one from Nova Scotia will come down, and now I guess a line of protection created along the back part of that 4 foot, but again, it's that one troublesome Ontario rock sitting right there, and I say troublesome because Nova Scotia right now having an inability to deal with it, and Ontario has last rock. Ontario would love to put a couple of points up here, and when you're a skip with hammer, that's what you want to do. You want to avoid the single point, you want to put a crooked number up, and you want to be able to take full advantage of having last rock or last throw in a particular end. So you can see McCauley and Cochrane talking about all kinds of potential combinations here. And it's risky. You know, we've talked about it all week. When you get that many rocks in play, and you have to be so precise when you come in, not only with your weight, but with your rock placement in terms of how they hit into the other rocks, it can be risky. You can plan it out and ideally know what's going to happen if you throw the perfect shot with the perfect weight and the perfect placement. But if you're off by just a little bit on any of those variables, it can go awfully bad, awfully quick. So Cochrane with the hammer here in this third end, looking down that sheet of ice into a very big pile of rocks sitting in the house. So the Ontario skip with his first of two here in this third end. And based on what happens here, we should have a little better idea of how this end may shake out. Sullivan says it's got lots of weight. Calling out back Abe Johnston. Sweeping it, really working out, trying to get a little directional sweeping going. And he's into that yellow and will tap it back and sit there. And oof, that's close as to whether or not that is second shot. Well, no, it is. Taking a look, the full rock almost inside the 4 foot, and then that Yellowstone just right in front of Andrew Dauphine's head there. And now you see it almost in the center of your screen, that yellow rock just set far enough back that it's currently Ontario red sitting 2. So a nice shot there by Brian Cochrane. So one shot left here, one throw for Nova Scotia and Alan O'Leary. And Dauphine and O'Leary are going to look to come down now and see if they can bring their final rock into the middle of that pile. And there's so many rocks in there that if O'Leary can somehow snuggle this rock in, he could very well get a steal through all of this. But this is going to be a tough shot. The Nova Scotia skip, well, he's been there before. He's seen this scenario, having to come up with a big shot for his last rock in an end, whether it be with hammer or without. And no different here. O'Leary, originally, as mentioned, from Winnipeg, Manitoba. That's his place of birth. But he's all Nova Scotia blue and white now. And he's throwing his last rock here, trying to avoid a couple of points for Ontario. Not laying a brush to it whatsoever. He might be a little thin here. Well, he pushes it back. His shooter rolls out. So the question is, and I think McCauley just tapped on that red, saying that that red is closer. So this could be an opportunity for 3 here. So you see McCauley tap on that yellow just outside the 4 foot, sitting on the tee line. So I would hazard a guess that Cochrane is going to want to come down, tap on that yellow, get a little roll to the inside. And if McCauley is right and that other Ontario stone is second shot, it would be a big 3 points for Ontario. So again, the curlers have a very good vantage point as to which rocks are closer, and McCauley tapped on that second Ontario red, I believe, indicating that he thought it was second shot. So McCauley hopes he's right, and Cochrane hopes he's got the right shot. They're going to look to come and again tap off that Nova Scotia yellow and roll to the inside. There's the tap. They don't get the roll, though. Not the shot he wanted. Now it goes from being a potential 3 to maybe just a 1, depending on what happens with those 2 rocks at the very back. And it's right there. So kind of interesting. They move everything out. Oh, I guess they're looking at those 2. So again, from our angle, I thought the one behind it might be closer. So they are going to measure. There's a better look at it. Sometimes, depending on the camera angle, it can be a little deceiving, almost like an optical illusion. It's kind of the way those rocks sit up higher on the ice than you would expect. So Cochrane had the opportunity to tap that Nova Scotia rock, roll to the inside. He didn't quite get the angle that he wanted. Everything else moved out of the way. So again, we'll wait and see now which one is closer. So again, sometimes they move the rock that's the scoring point. Sometimes they move the rock that's not. So I'm going to wait on the determination of how many points are scored until they actually put it up on the manual scoreboard. So there's that measuring device. I actually took a picture of it and tweeted it out yesterday. It's a little gauge on there with a needle. It shows you how much it moves. You can see the little needle moving on the gauge there as he brings it along that rock. And then as he swings it over to the other one, it's just a matter of whether the needle moves more or less. Boy, oh boy, that's close. That is close. Holy. I know I'm looking at it from here, from up here, and then checking out the monitor as well, but very hard to determine. My goodness. It almost appeared as if the needle moved the exact same amount. I don't know that I've ever seen them go around the measurement. They're going to remeasure. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Could it be possible that they are too close to call? So there you go. That's a good look right there. So the needle coming up. Just going, you saw how much it moved. We'll see now here on the other one. It went all the way around. I've never seen this before. So there, so close. My gosh. Well, the decision has been made, and the stones have been removed. But that was interesting. They went around. They put the measuring stick into the center dot. There's actually a hole right in the center of the button, they call it. And they went around. They measured, and it was too close to call. And they actually went all the way around again, reset, and measured again. So a little drama here in end number 3. So Nova Scotia throwing here, and we'll wait to see what they put up on the board. So how many points did Ontario get with the hammer? That is the question. Was it 2? Was it 3? And I'm only guessing because one of the other rocks that I thought was closer got moved out of the way, and it was another rock that they ended up measuring to see which was closer. So they're just, there it is. So it's 2. So it's 4-1. So it was 2 points for Ontario with the hammer. So not altogether bad. I mean, that's pretty good. You know, you want to put a crooked number up, but Ontario that close to getting 3, but Cochrane just didn't get the shot he wanted with his last rock. But still a pretty good end for Ontario, and now they will curl here in the 4th end. Nova Scotia will have the hammer. So the teams have scored in each end that they've had the hammer. 2 points for Ontario in the first, 2 more just then in the third, and a single for Nova Scotia in the second. So it's a 4-1 lead for Ontario as they look to solidify their first place in the men's pool. Ontario, just the 1 loss so far, no, only 2. So the 4th end here, they'll go to the 4th end break. After this, Bell Alliant is very pleased to be the official broadcaster for the 2016 Everest Canadian Senior Curling Championship. Live from the Digby Arena and the Digby Curling Club. located in beautiful Digby, Nova Scotia. Bell Alliant, there's more to love with fiber op. We have been here all week for every single draw. We've been bringing you feature games on sheet B and D from the Digby Arena. And of course, we will be here right through the crowning of champions for the men's and women's side at this Everest Senior Curling Championship. And of course, in between the semifinals and the final, we will have the Everest Furby National Pro-Am tomorrow at noon Atlantic time. The 4 senior club curlers who were lucky contest winners from across Canada have arrived in Digby, and they will be paired up with 4 very well-known and iconic Canadian curlers: Randy Furby, Jennifer Jones, Brad Jacobs, and Al Hackner. And it'll be Team against Team Jones. Team Jones, Jennifer Jones, defeated Team Furby in the Pro-Am last year, so Furby looking for a little payback. And those 2 team captains this evening in the Everest patch are going to draft their 2 teams. That's right. The 4 senior curling contest winners from across Canada will go into a pool of curlers with Al Hackner and Brad Jacobs. And then Jennifer Jones and Randy Furby will make their picks. The 2 teams will then get their team jackets. And tomorrow they'll hit the ice. Jackie Ray will be your master of ceremonies and other delightful things as she hits the ice with a live mic. Of course, all the curlers will be mic'd up, and well, it's going to be 6 ends of Pro-Am curling and a whole lot of other stuff. Some shenanigans, I would say, maybe a trick shot or 2, some good nature. And in between it all, 4 senior curlers from across Canada will get to curl with some pretty well-known Canadian curlers. All that and more tomorrow live on Bell Alliant TV1. And for the full schedule of events, visit bellalliant.ca/TV. Fourth end action here. Ontario on top, 4-1. Curling here in this fourth end. Nova Scotia has the hammer. One down hard and heavy, and it gets a ricochet effect off that other Ontario red, and O'Leary tried to jump on it right away there, as a bit unexpected, as a real pinball effect, as the red Ontario right onto that Nova Scotia yellow, and the big weight, the Yellow Rock caromed pinballed off the other Ontario guard and came right back into the ring. So the end result is that there's no guard on that left side of your screen, and that Nova Scotia rock now has been put into the house and is sitting at the top of the 12. So an interesting zigzag pinball shot. And sometimes when you let that big weight go and you start crashing into rocks, you just never know what you're going to end up with. So 2 on, sitting right at that center line. A Nova Scotia rock off to the side in the top 12. Seems to be a little uncertainty here on Danny Christensen's face. Looking down for some direction from Alan O'Leary. So we'll see now. Looks like he's going to come down with some takeout weight and try and double out those 2 Ontario red rocks. Right down that center line. Into one. And the double takeout is made. One Ontario red right out the back. The other one slides all the way over out of the rings and sits just to the lower left. So a nice shot there by Danny Christensen. A little uncertain at first, but once he got clarity from his skip O'Leary, he settled in and delivers some nice weight and good line. Doubles out those 2 Ontario reds. So now just the 2 Nova Scotia rocks sitting there, and Cochrane wants to have a chat with McCauley. So I just went off headset for a moment. My colleague Jim Nix, who's calling the women's game, our feature game over on sheet D. It's in the fourth end break there. So Jim, a wily veteran himself, I asked him, I said, do you know why Brian Cochran uses that whistle? Because this is the first time I've had a chance to Ontario game, and I hadn't noticed that whistle before. No one had mentioned it. So Jim said, actually, because typically you wouldn't be allowed to use a whistle like that, but there is a condition that Brian has that requires or enables him to get the permission to use that whistle. So he uses the blasts whistle to basically call instruction out to his front end when they're sweeping rocks down the ice. So there's the answer as to why Brian Cochran has that whistle and utilizes it. And thanks to Jim Nix for the explanation on there. Now, if Jim could just tell me how they get the caramel and the caramel bear, I'd bet. So a bit of an empty house here, much cleaner this end than we've seen the last couple of ends. Far fewer rocks in play at this point in this fourth end with Nova Scotia down by 3. There you see that one guard off to the side, and the other Nova Scotia rocks were cleared out by Ontario. And they have a rock sitting at the top of the 12, as you can see. And then this Nova Scotia offering comes down to the corner and will sit off to the side just above that T-line, which is the black line that you see going right through the middle, left to right or right to left. And of course it intersects with the center line going right down the middle into the button. Fourth end action here. The fourth end break will commence at the conclusion of this end. Ian McCauley from Surrey, PEI. Population 1173. And we've talked about previous draws. We've been covering the PEI teams actually, but I've talked about how Charlottetown is the birthplace of Confederation in Canada. Surrey, PEI, I did a little research, was incorporated in 1740. So Surrey, small town where Ian McCauley was born. Small population, but a long history. And not to be outdone from being from a small town. A little bit larger, but from Ontario standpoints. Arnprior, Ontario, which is where Doug Johnson is from, the second from Ontario. Population there. This is Andrew Doffney now for Team Nova Scotia. Peering down at his shot as he watches it sail toward the rings, crossing over that center line in the hog. And looks like it's going to stop just on the 2 L's in Bell Alliant. So, a low guard put up there. Cochran will go down now as we get into skip stones here. In this fourth end, again, Nova Scotia will have last rock here. Ontario with a deuce in 1 and 3, and Nova Scotia with a single and 2. You hear some of the calling and action going on coming through our camera. 5 ends in play here, 5 sheets, I should say, in play here. Cochran, quiet wait now as he comes down and watches his shot. It starts to move over just a little bit, crossing over toward that center line, trying to curl it over and get it in behind that cover, and perhaps doesn't curl over as far as he would have liked, but still not a bad shot. It'll sit there at the top of the 8. So there's a look, kind of a bird's eye view, if you will, or what the shooter will see when they sit into the hack and getting ready to throw. And in behind, Macaulay and Cochrane from Ontario having a little chat about things. And just to the extreme right, you see Laura Wilson from Team Yukon. And I was chatting with her earlier a couple of days ago. We were doing a draw with the Yukon women's team, and she took a little tumble during the session. She was somewhat mortified when I told her that we were covering that game and that we had her fall in all its glory. But I did remind her that my first comment was talking about the presence of mind she had to avoid burning the rock she was sweeping, plus the other one. And we've had a couple of good laughs about that since. I also nicknamed Team Yukon because of their dark purple tops and their black, the Ninjas. They did tell me they were going to wear ninja headbands tonight, but I don't see them. I'll have to talk to them about that after. Ontario here, down into Skipstone's Alan O'Leary with his first of two in this fourth end. Trying to get a couple of points here and climb back into this one going into the fourth end break. Want to get it by that red one, and they do just squeak it by. Now how far can they bring it over? Now it'll sit right there, halfway between the top of the floor and about half that rock exposed. And that's what Cochrane is looking at there. And there you see just how much of that yellow rock is jutting out from behind the red in front of it. So, Cochrane with his second here. Right down that center line. He's got big, going to crash right in there, move everything around. Angles it back, moves it around. I don't know if he got the result that he wanted. I think he was hoping to move that yellow rock a little further outside of the fringe of the forefoot. But again, I won't make the call from here. It's going to be very close right now as to whether Nova Scotia rock or the Red Ontario would be shot rock, and I think that's perhaps what Dauphney and O'Leary are talking about right now. So O'Leary has surveyed the situation, talked it over with Dauphney, has a word with his front end, McCarthy and Christensen, sweeping this final rock from O'Leary here in this fourth end. Nice effort by Cochrane as he came down with that big weight, just looking to crash into those rocks, move them around. He thought he had the angle down, and I don't think he moved that Nova Scotia rock as much as he would have liked. So we'll see what O'Leary can do here now with his final. Last rock of this fourth end, moments away from the fourth end break, moments away from knowing how well Nova Scotia will do in this end. It's across the center line, trying to angle that back. Now the question is, how far will it roll? Too far for Nova Scotia's liking, and it's a single point for Team Nova Scotia. So just a little too thin and a little too much weight, too much roll. And Nova Scotia, again, forced to take a single. So 4 ends in the books. We'll step off to the fourth end break. It's 4-2, Ontario leading Nova Scotia's final draw before the playoffs tomorrow. We'll be back.
My name's Penny Graham, and I was actually born and brought up on Briar Island. Briar Island being the gateway to the Bay of Fundy, this is where the Bay of Fundy begins. Our company is Mariner Cruises, and we offer whale watching and bird watching. And when I'm wallowing upon the sea-bound course of Mars. It's only in the bay that you're going to experience these natural wonders. See, these whales come here only to eat and raise their young. Species of whales that frequent the bay are humpbacks, minkies, fin whales, and occasionally the North Atlantic right whale. Humpbacks have a personality like no other whale because they're so usually friendly, and there are days that they're as actually curious about us as we are them. We see Atlantic puffins, Wilson storm petrels, northern gannets, northern fulmars, and red and redneck phalaropes. There's seals out there, harbor seals and gray seals, actually that make their home right here down around Gull Rock. When you're on one of my tours, you can actually expect the unexpected because we never know what we're going to see.
The Bay of Fundy is one of the best places in the world to see whales, particularly in the summer. Principally, we see the humpback whale through a good part of the summer, and every once in a while we see the right whales in our area. With the Zodiac, they're right there, right beside you. You can't appreciate how big they are until they come up right beside you in the Zodiac.
Oh my God.
It really is, for a lot of people, a dream come true.
It was great. Way more than I expected. I never dreamt we'd see 13 whales and all those porpoises, and a perfect day for it. I mean, you couldn't get a better day than this.
It was a great trip. Great rails, sunny day. What do you want more?
First throw here of end number 5. Nova Scotia scoring a single point in the 4th. And it's 4-2 Ontario in the 5th end. Ontario, of course, will have last rock here in end number 5. Nova Scotia McCarthy open up with a mid-range guard. Well, the difference in this match right now, it's 2 points, and it's the fact that Ontario with the hammer has been able to score 2 points twice. Nova Scotia with hammer twice only. So that's where we are here. And not 100% on this, just because if 3 teams are tied at the top with identical records, there's still some calculations that would have to be done. But I'm fairly certain in saying that Nova Scotia, currently in 3rd, if they beat Ontario, there would be 3 teams with 8-2 records. That would be Ontario, Manitoba, and Nova Scotia. All of those teams would have beaten one another. That being the case, they go to the closest to the button percentage, and I believe, from what I've heard on that end, even if Nova Scotia wins and has the same record of Ontario, Nova Scotia still can't be any higher than the 2nd seed based on the fact that all the teams have beat one another, and then they go to that 2nd area for the tiebreaker. However, Nova Scotia finishing 2nd would give them top seed in the 2 versus 3 semifinal tomorrow. So again, that does have its advantages. So again, something to play for here. We already know the 4 teams that are going to be in the semifinals tomorrow. It's going to be Ontario, Manitoba, BC, and again, this is on the men's side. What we just don't exactly know is the specific seeds and who will match up in the 2 semifinals tomorrow. And even at the conclusion of this game, unless Ontario wins, then we might be able to definitively say, but again, 100% for sure until things are calculated once we are off the air. So we do know the 4 teams, we just don't know the seedings and who will play who. What we can tell you is we'll be on the air tomorrow morning at 9:30 Atlantic time. Sheet B, the game that I'll have for you, it'll be the women's 2 versus 3 matchup, and then on sheet D with Jim Nix, it will be men's 1 versus 4. The women's 1 versus 4 will be on sheet A, and then men's 2 versus 3 on sheet E. Of course, those games are on simultaneously with our feature games. And then we'll have the men's gold game on sheet B, that's this sheet. 3 o'clock Atlantic time, gold medal for women on sheet D, also 3 o'clock Atlantic. So all that plus the Everest Furby Pro-Am live tomorrow on Bell Line TV1. On the air, 9:30 Atlantic. So almost a perfect, look at that, almost a perfect straight line of rocks. Again, sometimes it simply boggles my mind how these rocks were thrown with different weights, with different curl, with different whatever. But you still look at that. It's almost as if you just went down and took a ruler and placed it down for guide and just placed them like dots right up the ice. A straight line of rocks. Curling is a game, my friends, on many levels. So Nova Scotia here playing these yellow rocks. Going to look to come in and we'll just bump on that and sit right there. So 2 by 2, or as I would say in my native Newfoundland if I was back home, side by each. Are those 2 red and 2 yellow? Hopefully there's some folks back in Newfoundland watching this, Newfoundland and Labrador. I'm a native of St. John's, Newfoundland. Always like to get a little plug in for my home province, but Nova Scotia as well, my adopted home. Following almost the same line here. I'll come down and push that back, and what that essentially does, at least right now, is create some protection for that red rock that just got thrown in there, because you can't really hit it and run it back because you're just going to jam up against those 2 Nova Scotia rocks. So we'll see now. O'Leary discussing what they may want to do. So can they come in and squeeze it in between those 2 red rocks? Or do they want to come down and freeze? Andrew Daphne the Vice. Telling them to lay off. You heard him, no, he said, in his front end of Christensen and McCarthy. Back right off. And they come down in there, move that one. Well, they do tap the red just a little bit, but kind of created more of a log jam now right in around that 4 foot. Well, we've seen this a couple of ends in this game. All kinds of rocks. Most of the rocks that have been thrown still in play at some point or another, either as guards or in the house. McCauley calls the sweepers off again. Hang this out turn. Starts to curl in now. Going to come in there and tap back his own, and again, nestle in right in there and gets a little roll to the inside. That's a nice looking shot there. Good weight from McCauley as he brings that right into the middle. And sets up Ontario for right now. So you just saw O'Leary tap on that yellow at the top. Well, now he wants to call time and discuss it with his team. So a timeout here in the 5th end. And I think O'Leary has to really examine those rocks because they're so tightly bunched. And I think he's trying to figure out if he comes in there and brings some big weight and tries to have these rocks collide into one another, what kind of reaction is he going to get? You know, we've talked pinball reaction. Well, once you bring any kind of weight into a cluster of rocks like we're seeing, unless you've got the perfect weight and the perfect position, those rocks can pinball in a way that really ends up helping your opponent rather than helping yourself. So O'Leary now has the entire team in there. Harold McCarthy, Christensen, Andrew Dauphney, and Skip O'Leary. And you see Dauphney saying, okay, if we hit this one goes here, that one goes there. But then again, if we come down and hit this other one, that one will go there and that one will go there. It's about, I don't know, maybe countless combinations, and it's a pyramid of rocks coming from the hack down. O'Leary blocking it now, but there you have a look. You've got that Yellowstone right in the foreground, but then you get into the rings. You have that one red Ontario rock, but then that yellow one, and then you have 2 red going either side off of it, so it's like a little mini pyramid. And the thing is that they're so tightly bunched that it's hard to sometimes predict what the reaction is going to be and how they're going to come out of that pile if you do come in there. You think you might have it figured out, and you know that, hey, if I hit it here, that should do this and that should do that. But we've seen 50 situations all week long where there's been similar opportunities and they've gone one way or the other. It either goes against the person throwing it and helps the other team, or the person throwing it gets just what they want and makes the advantage for their side. So Andrew Dauphney here, not even in skip stones yet, and he's got a big throw. Big moment here for Nova Scotia. They're down by 2, and they are facing the last rock from Ontario. Well, they're going right in there. They're going to be right on the side of that yellow. They do move them around, clear out that little log jam just a little bit. The shooter rolls out, but wait for Cochran to slide aside there, and it looks like Nova Scotia may be shot right now, but then a kind of a zigzaggy line of red right in behind it, going almost across the entire 4 foot, and then a couple of yellow rocks in behind. So again, Ian McCarthy now, or excuse me, Ian McCauley for PEI, or I should say the PEI native for Ontario. Now he calls on it. Just brushing it for line here, switching back and forth. Looking to come into that little gap. And it's going to tap off of that guard and sit right there. So, just a little bit off on that line. It ends up ticking off that red rock just in the 12-foot. So now, what do you do if you're Alan O'Leary? Not unlike what he had moments ago, just a real cluster of rocks. A little more space between them, but still. So keeping in mind, red Ontario, yellow Nova Scotia. Ontario with the hammer here. We're into skipstones now. Still 4 rocks to go here. It seems like every rock on the ice is already in play, but we still have 4 rocks to be thrown. 2 from O'Leary and 2 from the skip for Ontario, Cochrane. Alan O'Leary attended St. Mary's University in Halifax. Got those nice flashy red socks on. I'm a connoisseur of socks, so I appreciate a good sock. O'Leary throwing a quiet draw weight here. Coming over, and it'll just come to rest as a guard. So it does appear that Nova Scotia rock is shot rock, so O'Leary trying to create a little protection and just clog up that middle just a little more, make it harder for Cochrane to get anything about it. But there is a small port, ever so small, between those 2 rocks, and it would appear that Cochrane is going to try and come right down between them. I think so anyway. No, he peels off that guard. I guess he just figured, I didn't think there was enough of a hole to go through. It was hard to tell from the angle, but he comes down, peels off the guard that was just put in place. And now O'Leary, we'll see if he comes down and puts that same rock in place. Well, we expected a battle here between these 2 teams. 2 of the 4 teams who will play tomorrow in the men's semifinals, looking to get into the championship game in the afternoon. O'Leary looking for his 2nd Canadian Senior Championship. He's had a pretty good run. Canadian Senior Championship in 2014, World Senior Silver in 2015, and going into the semifinals here in 2016. So a guard put in place a little higher this time, perhaps making it a little more difficult should Cochrane decide he maybe wanted to try and run that guard back. Visit bellalliant.ca/TV1 for online and on-demand content, as well as information on exclusive programming available to Bell Alliant Fiber Op customers in Atlantic Canada only on Channel 1 and 401. Bell Alliant, there's more to love with Fiber Op. And Brian Cochrane is going to love it if he can get the shot that he wants here to finish off this 5th end. Last rock here, Nova Scotia looking to get the steal. There's a look at what he's coming into. Johnston, the lone brusher on this, comes down into the pile, moves those rocks around. Now, are they saying that Nova Scotia, or are they going to measure? No, they kick it out of the way. So again, I think it might be a steal of 1. Hard to tell from this angle. I don't want to say definitively, but scorekeeper over in a dash. Look at that. Heartbeat, talk about a ninja. Scorekeeper ninja like there as he jumped into the screen, and it is a steal of 1. So good end there for Alan O'Leary as they get the steal, making it a 4-3 game. So the first steal that we've seen here in this one, and it goes to O'Leary and Nova Scotia, and an end that was getting more interesting rock by rock. So many rocks in play. And O'Leary does what he has to do. Some smart shot selection by Alan O'Leary, and it just made it very hard for Brian Cochran and Ontario to do anything with that grouping of rocks in the middle. And at the end, Cochran tried to come in and move them around, but he couldn't get what he wanted. It is indeed a steal of 1 for Team Nova Scotia. So, into the 6th end we go. Now a 1-point game, and Ontario will have the hammer here in end number 4. Thanks some of the sponsors from this 2016 Everest Curling Championships. Platinum sponsors include the town of Digby, Municipality of the District of Digby, Province of Nova Scotia, the Department of Health and Wellness Division, Bell Canada, and ACOA, the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency. And silver sponsors would include Simcoe Refrigeration, Tim Hortons, Digby, Conway, and Meteghan, Jet Ice, the Atlantic Superstore Digby, and Broker Link Insurance. A thank you to those sponsors and all the sponsors from the Digby Area Recreation Commission. Those sponsors are so integral in making an event like this come together and happen, as well as upwards of 150 volunteers from the local area. We are live at the Digby Arena on a Friday night here, just past 7:30 Atlantic time in Digby. Nice crowd on Friday evening in the stands, taking this one in. And on this particular game, our feature game on Sheet B, the Alan O'Leary Nova Scotia rink on home soil, trailing Ontario here in the 6th end by a score of 4-3. And Ontario with last rock. Ken Sullivan throwing lead rock for Ontario here. Throwing his second. Going well by those two centerline guards that Nova Scotia has in play, and he'll come down and just tap up against that first rock that Sullivan delivered down there. Get you an update in just a moment on the feature game on Sheet D. Jim Nix bringing you the play-by-play call over on that sheet. This Nova Scotia rock now coming down will work over toward that center line. And how far over will it go? Well, it'll sit right there, almost right on the center line. So a third consecutive guard put up by Alan O'Leary and Team Nova Scotia. I think we may have another end here with a lot of rocks in play. At least it kind of has that feel of going that way. We might get a few of them taken out here, as you see Doug Johnston throwing some big weight, looking to move those. There's one gone. There's two spilling out the back, and the third Nova Scotia guard gets moved a little deeper and will sit just off the center line. So pretty good shot there from Doug Johnson as he clears up some of that traffic right around the center line area. And after this delivery from Nova Scotia, and Danny Christensen will bring you up to date on some of the scores on the women's side of the draw here this evening. Final draw on this Friday, day 5. Christensen a little heavy with this one, it would appear, as it goes through everything and right out the back, and will be booted over to the corner by O'Leary. So the women's action here, Yukon and Manitoba. It's 4-2 for the Yukon, play in the 6th end. Saskatchewan and Ontario. A big 5-1 lead currently for Skip Rizzo over Sherry Anderson and Saskatchewan. 5-1 the score there. Play in the also in the fifth end. Alberta leading Colleen Jones by a score of 3-2. And New Brunswick and Newfoundland and Labrador in a close one. Newfoundland and Labrador leading currently over New Brunswick 3-2 in the sixth end. And the final women's action going on this evening. Quebec and PEI leading in the fifth end 4-0 over Quebec. So that brings you up to date on the scores on the women's side of things. We'll get to the scoreboard on the men's side in just a minute. Only 3 games going on this evening on the men's side of things. This Nova Scotia Rock coming over now right across the face of the sheet, and will sit about 3 feet above the top of the 12, just on that center line. Men's action, of course, our game here. Ontario leading Nova Scotia 4-3. We're in the sixth end. Saskatchewan and PEI, close one there, 2-0. PEI leading in the fifth end. And Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador. Alberta with a 4-2 lead in that one, also in the fifth end. So you're up to date on all the scores here in the final draw on this Friday. So all of the guards that were in place have been systematically eliminated. So no play whatsoever at this point, and just the 2 rocks that you see in play, and they both belong to Ontario. Wouldn't at all be surprised if you see an attempt here from Alan O'Leary to have those eliminated and doubled out of play. So Dauphney now with that takeout weight. It's all about the line and angle at this point. Looks good from here, although he jammed just a little bit. Can they get that out? Well, it spins to a stop, so 50-50 result for Dauphney as he comes into that pile looking to get the double. Doesn't quite get it as the shooter and the second Ontario rock roll over to the 12-foot, and the other Ontario stone got sent out the back. Sixth end. Hard to believe that we are into the last few ends of this fifth day of action. 19 draws this week, and then it's down to the nitty-gritty tomorrow. Semifinals and finals on both the women's and men's side in the 2016 Everest Canadian Senior Curling Championship. It's a close one here, just a 1-point game. Ontario leading 4-3. They do have last rock here in this end. Nova Scotia stealing a point in the last end. And that Ontario stone now as the other side of the rings, and will sit just behind that tee line in the 8-foot. Quick recap of the scoring for you while O'Leary and Dauphney talk things over. Ontario with 2 in the first, Nova Scotia single in 2. Ontario 2 more in the third, and then Nova Scotia coming back with a single in 4, and then stealing 1. And so we are here in the sixth end, getting down into skip stones now of this battle at the top of the table on the men's side. O'Leary, the skip, Christensen and McCarthy, the front end, ready to sweep. And down, waiting at the other end, Andrew Dauphney. O'Leary, one last look down. And his shot is on its way. O'Leary keeping a close eye. Running fairly straight here down this center line. Now it starts to come over just a tiny little bit. And O'Leary has thrown this by everything. So a miss there for Alan O'Leary as he throws through the house. So a bit of a misread on the ice there. And now Ontario with last rock certainly are going to want to take advantage of that. O'Leary walks right off to the back there and grabs a beverage. Good crowd in behind there. You see the gallery. And a good crowd in the stands as well. And I would expect come tomorrow, it'll be even more jam-packed here at the Digby Arena. I've had a lovely the come from away bed and breakfast. So nice each morning to come out and just look out over the water. It is right down in the waterfront, and whether it's sunny or cloudy or even a bit of rain, just to look out and see that beautiful horizon and the water. And when it is sunny, to see the sun shimmering off the top of the blue water. It's absolutely spectacular. I've enjoyed myself very much here this week in Sydney, in Digby, I should say. Very like Sydney, though, in terms of the landscape and the waterfront. I lived in Sydney for 2 years. Sydney on my mind. Ontario coming down. Will they tick on that? They do. And I'll tick on that Nova Scotia rock, just push it over, and then the shooter rolls over towards the middle. So that's what Alan O'Leary has to look at here. Somewhat of a split of the rings by those Ontario Red rocks that you see. 2 Ontario Reds sitting in the 8-foot, split well enough apart on either side of that center line. And O'Leary looks like he's going to come down and deal with those rocks on the right side. Could there be an opportunity for a double here? But even if he can, it would be a open draw for Cochrane to score 2. Final rock here for O'Leary, looking to get some double action. Coming in here, working it, line looks good. Question is, does he get that double? There's one, there's 2. Nice shot by O'Leary. Pressure shot, and O'Leary delivers. Now it will be a draw for 2 unless Cochrane wants to come down and maybe tap on that. And I think that's what McCauley is asking. Do you want to come down and play off that yellow and try and get a roll over? That might be a little risky. It all is a matter of how comfortable Cochrane is with the ice and his draw weight. And it does look like Cochrane is going to come down and try and draw for a score of 2. Asking for a little more ice, I believe. So a chance here for Cochrane to extend this lead into the 7th end. Final rock is away. Playing an out-turn draw here. Or might he be coming down just to tap on that Nova Scotia rock? That's what he's going to do. I thought that might be what he did the first time. So again, he comes down, taps on that yellow, and scores 2. And it's funny, Chuck Calder and I, Chuck doing the directing today, had a about that earlier, and Chuck was wondering aloud as to sometimes when you see an opportunity like Cochrane just had to either draw down and score a point, or to come down and hit or tap or even freeze up against another rock, but typically, hit or tap. Why a lot of times you'll see the skip choose the latter, and I guess it comes down to the fact that it has to depend on how well you're reading the ice, how comfortable you are with your draw weight. And the other side of it is that usually a little more wiggle room if you're playing a hit and a stick, or a little hit and roll on an opponent's rock. That's what Cochrane did right there. He throws the nice rock, he gets what he needs, and regardless of the approach, it's 3 times 2 for Ontario. Deuce in the first, deuce in the third, and deuce in the 6th. So a 6-3 lead now as Ontario doubling up on Nova Scotia here in this 7th end. Nova Scotia will have last rock. Again, just recapping the standings for you. Ontario 8-1. Manitoba has already played all of their draws. They are 8-2. Nova Scotia 7-2. And British Columbia, again, have also played their 10 draws. They are 7-3. And those are the 4 teams who will be in the semifinals tomorrow on the men's side. We just don't know who will be playing who yet. And a lot will be based, obviously, on the outcome of this game. I mentioned the other teams in the playoff championship pool as well. Saskatchewan 5-4, and Newfoundland and Labrador, PEI, and Alberta all at 4-5, pending the outcome of their games this evening. So we've got 7th end action here in this 8th end game. Bell Alliant is proud to be the official broadcaster of the 2016 Everest Canadian Seniors Curling Championship. Live from the Digby Arena and the Digby Curling Club, located in beautiful Digby, Nova Scotia. A lovely week here. Earlier down in the Everest Patch, I walked in and I saw this humongous lineup. And I said to one of the curlers, "What's going on over there?" And they looked at me with a big grin and said, "This is the scallop line." So they had a couple of hot plates set up, and they were cooking scallops as fast as people could eat them, and people were eating them as fast as they could be prepared. And I'll tell you what, there was an awful lot of folks from various provinces across Canada that were enjoying their signature and famous Digby scallops. I got a picture of the scallop line, so if you go follow me on Twitter, my Twitter name is @Johsco, JOHSCO, you will see the picture of the scallop line. No question, Digby, well known for its scallops. So a couple of rocks thrown here in this end, and there you see the current setup. A couple of Nova Scotia guards out front, opposite sides of that center line, and in the middle, in the rings, a red belonging to Ontario. And you hear that blow of the whistle from Cochrane. Obviously, he has a good system down with his front end. They know what each blast of the whistle means. And look at this, right across the face, trying for the double. Almost got it. That was a great effort there by Ontario. Again, we've seen some great shot making here. So, Nova Scotia again, right down that center line. O'Leary has to try and set up a big end here. Cannot afford to go into that 8th end trailing and having Ontario with the hammer. Tricky situation here for Nova Scotia. One of those guards taken care of. Pretty open right now, and that's just fine for Team Ontario. The cleaner it is, the less chance for kind of one of those topsy-turvy, anything can happen ends. Ontario up by 6, looking to solidify first place and the first seed going into tomorrow's semifinals. And I'll just double check, but I do believe that if Ontario did hold on to win and Nova Scotia went to 7-3, they'd have the same record as BC. But based on the strength of Nova Scotia beating BC, Nova Scotia would hang on to the 3rd seed. So if Ontario wins, it would be cut. It would be Ontario versus BC in the 1 versus 4. And it would be Manitoba versus Nova Scotia in the 2 versus 3. But still some curling left to go here. You never know what can happen. But Ontario, again, thought they might be able to go across the face, but just too sharp an angle. They do take out one Nova Scotia guard, so Ontario keeping it clean here, and I would expect to see that pretty much be the way that they played out here the rest of this end. I'm sure they'd be okay giving up a single point to Nova Scotia, maybe even 2, and keep it. But you don't want to play with fire. A steal of 1 or even a steal of 2, not unheard of in today's game of curling. So Nova Scotia brings their rock down through that gap, and the Dauphin Stone will sit just about on that tee line in the 8-foot. No surprise at all to see Ontario take this out. The PEI native, I'm sure he's got friends and family back home on the island cheering him on. McCauley with that little spin. He's got the stabilizer. Oh, he has a reset here. Not sure if the applause from the fans kind of threw him off there, but he was starting into his backswing, and then some applause erupted, and he decided to stop. They're kind of like a golfer in their backswing. They don't have to hear any crowd noise. So McCauley resets and delivers. Just looking to wipe out those Nova Scotia stones that are down there. No doubt about the weight. There's the peel. And Nova Scotia rock taken out of play. So McCauley doing his job, and now Dauphin will just come in there again. It's a pretty straightforward, clean end at this point, and Ontario making it that way. They're up by 3. They just want to close this one out now and secure first overall and the first seed. That Dauphin offering, tapping off their own guard, and will spin and stop right there. So we'll see now if Cochrane, how he wants to deal with those 2 yellow rocks. Nova Scotia with the last rock here in the 7th end, but they do trail by 3, and they are running out of rocks in this end. So Cochrane, the Ontario skip, asking for a little more ice and talking about his turn he's going to use here. Ontario in control right now, up by 3, late stages of this 7th end. Looking to go 9-1 through this tournament. So out of his hand, good weight, playing the in turn here. Little brushing on it right away, more so for line than anything. And he's on that Nova Scotia rock, clears it out of the way, shooter rolls off. And we're left with just the 2 rocks that you see there, the 1 Nova Scotia guard off to the left, and then that Ontario rock sitting in the 8-foot, top of the 8, right on that center line. So O'Leary, Dauphin talking things over, trying to decide what side of the ice they want to go down, how they want to deal with this, how they can best set themselves up here. At this particular point, I don't know if that guard at the top is going to come into play, but it still is in play. But it would appear Nova Scotia would be able to do no better than score 2 in this end, which would send them to the 8th end, still trailing and giving Ontario the hammer. But I think O'Leary would be okay, being down by a point, trying to steal an 8. Always nice when you have two talented and experienced curling foursomes going head to head. We've seen some great matchups all day. Just having a off headset chat there with who is right next to me, calling the action on Sheet D, the game between Alberta and Nova Scotia on the women's side. And we were just discussing the possibility of Colleen Jones, if she's able to win, and some other things falling into place, maybe capturing first seed overall on the women's side. So again, lots of things to be decided here in this last draw on this Friday. Same thing here. If Ontario wins, we pretty much know what the matchups will be, but if Nova Scotia wins, it would be based on some other calculations, and we wouldn't be able to say definitively until we were off the air. So Brian Cochrane trying to minimize the point potential here for Nova Scotia. And the Ontario skip delivers his final stone here in the 7th end. Right down that center line, which means you'll be able to really see when it starts to move, and there it goes. No problem by the guard. Trying to take it back now. How much of a rollover, if any, will they get? Well, not much of one. It basically hits and sticks right there. Pushes that Nova Scotia rock apparently out the back. I don't know if the leading edge of that rock would be touching on the blue of the 12-foot, but that's really not any concern to O'Leary right now. He's got to deal with the two rocks in front of him. Does he have the double? I think that's what they're talking about. Daphne talking about hitting on that red rock that's at the top of the 8, running it back onto that other red Ontario stone. So O'Leary, his rock already in place in the hack. All they need now is the Nova Scotia skip to settle in and deliver. Final stone here for Nova Scotia, and the last stone in this 7th end. Nova Scotia trailing by 3. Trying to grab the 2nd seed in the men's pool and go to the 2-3 game tomorrow. O'Leary's shot is coming well down one side of the sheet, looking to bring it over here. Gotta go, says O'Leary. Really starting to move over now. Do they get it by? They just do, and it'll slide into the top of that 4-foot. So a single point for O'Leary. He trails by 1 going into the 8th end. So 6-4 is your score. So a deficit of 2 for Ontario. Excuse me, for Nova Scotia versus Ontario. And we will move to the 8th end. Nova Scotia looking to steal here to potentially win, although a steal of 3 would be a tall order. Certainly a steal of 2, maybe a little more reasonable to away. Nova Scotia looking to steal to either win or force an extra end. Well, what would you expect? Anything less between two teams that between them only have 3 losses. Ontario, as mentioned, coming in 8-1. Nova Scotia 7-2. And Harold McCarthy with his first throw here in the 8th and final end of regulation. Do we have an extra end in our picture? Well, that'll be determined in just a few rocks from now. So the guard put up by Nova Scotia, and now it's your move, Brian Cochrane. And in this particular case, Ken Sullivan, who will be throwing for the Cochrane-led ring. So Ken Sullivan has his throw on the way. Trying to tick that over. How far will it go? That'll stop right there. So the Nova Scotia rock well over to the side, just biting on the edge of that 12 right on the tee line. Meanwhile, the Sullivan shooter sits off well to the corner. Now it's Harold McCarthy. With his second shot here. And almost identical placement as his first rock. Ken Sullivan gets ready to throw his second here in the 8th end. Ontario with the last rock, of course, leading by 2. Remind you about our schedule. Tomorrow, semifinals and finals, and with the Everest Furby National Pro-Am sandwiched in between. And just ticking that guard over just a little bit. Shooter rolls to the very back of the house. So, some rocks in play, but a pretty wide spread. Danny Christensen now, but getting back to that schedule for tomorrow. We'll be on the air. Sheets B and D, 9:30 a.m. Atlantic time. Here on Sheet B, we'll have the women's 2 versus 3 matchup. And Jim Nix over on Sheet D will have the men's 1 versus 4. Then at noon, the Furby Pro-Am, the Everest Furby National Pro-Am will take place. Randy Furby, Jennifer Jones, Al Hackner, Brad Jacobs, teaming up with 4 lucky senior curlers from across Canada, contest winners. And they'll curl 6 ends of a Pro-Am event with a lot of other shenanigans in between. And of course, we'll have that live for you as well. You don't want to miss that tomorrow at noon, Atlantic time on Bell and Lion TV1. And then the crowning jewel of this week, the men's and women's gold medal matchups. And a nice double take out there. Make it 3. 1, 2, 3. That's a nice looking play. The trifecta of yellow eliminated rocks there. A good delivery from Team Ontario and Doug Johnston. That'll make life just a little more difficult for Nova Scotia here, who are trying to set up a steal. So the gold will be on Sheet B, 3 o'clock Atlantic, and on Sheet D, the gold medal women's game. Again, the 2 semifinals, the Everest Furby National Pro-Am, and the gold for men and women, all on Bell Alliant TV1 tomorrow. And we get it going 9:30 a.m. Atlantic time. Don't miss it. So Team Nova Scotia just running out of rocks here, and I wouldn't expect to do anything other than keep it clean here. Johnson taking out their own. Shooter rolls out. And that is the definition of keeping it clean when you take out your own rock. You don't get much cleaner than that. And it's pretty clear what the intent is. Little giggle Cochrane. I don't think there's any secrets as to what we're going to see here in this end. Nova Scotia will put something in play, and I would be shocked if Ontario did anything other than take it out. Just past PM local time here in Digby, Nova Scotia. We are on Atlantic time. Wherever you're watching around the world, hope you're enjoying yourselves. We're having a great time bringing it to you. First time ever in the history of the Canadian Senior National Curling Championships that it's been broadcast live via webcasting online. I'm happy to be able to bring this quality broadcast to you. It's been great talking to a lot of the curlers, their family, friends, and acquaintances, and otherwise watching from around the world. Ian McCauley likes to give that rock a little spinaroo before he gets ready to throw. You hear that whistle blast coming from the Ontario Skip Cochrane. Well, quelle surprise. Whoa, right up over the foam and onto the blue there, and a giggle from Doug Johnson as he had to trip up over that foam and chase after that. I think that's the first time we've seen a rock hop up over that spongy foam. Or foamy sponge, one or the other. Great job here. I was talking to a couple of the ice makers here, asking them about the efforts of turning this Digby hockey rink into 5 curling sheets, and he just looked at me and said, whew, hours and hours of work. So again, we should recognize the hard work of all of the volunteers, and as well as the ice crew that work here at the Digby Arena and the curling club. They had to do a lot of work to get this venue ready for the national championship. This event held here back in 2011, and everybody enjoyed it so much. It was an easy decision when the organizing committee was looking at where to go for the 2016 event, and Digby welcomed them with open arms. McCauley, I wonder if you can guess what he's doing with this shot. He's certainly not playing draw weight. Into the pile, doubles them out. Shooter will roll just outside. Well, no, it's going to hang right there. But he did what he wanted to do. He cleaned out that yellow Nova Scotia. So, as we get down to skip stones here now, I think Alan O'Leary, he's not going to stop. He's going to keep going, but I'm sure somewhere in the back of his mind, he kind of sees the writing on the wall here. It's going to take a pretty big miss from Ontario to allow Nova Scotia to do what they need to do here, which is steal a couple of points. So, getting down to skip stones here in this 8th end. Brian Cochrane and his Ontario rink looking to go to an impressive 9-1 in this tournament. If this score holds up, O'Leary would drop to 7-3 and would play Manitoba in the 2-3 game. Ontario would get British Columbia in the 1-4. O'Leary coming down on the side here, looking to have it stop just on that tee line, and he does. So, Brian Cochrane, pretty sure we know what to expect here. All he's got to do is take care of those 2 yellow rocks. And some handshakes. And it'll be a 9-1 record and first seed coming out of the championship pool. And first seed tomorrow in the 1 versus 4 game, and they'll take on British Columbia. So here we go. Cochrane. First stone here, but it could be the last rock of this 8th end. There goes 1, there goes 2. Oh, it's going to hang around. So we will. I think they're saying that redstone might have. No, McCauley started to move it. Maybe a little prematurely. And now O'Leary not liking that situation. Not sure if McCauley thought that bounced off the foam on the side and came back. Everything kind of happened quickly there with those rocks so close up against the side. McCauley started to move it out of the way, thinking that it had already been out of play, but O'Leary quick to correct him on that, and O'Leary put it back where he thought it should go. And now he's going to call timeout, so don't go anywhere just yet. Cochrane had the chance to end it, but because of how tight those rocks were to the side, he couldn't get the double that he wanted. And now O'Leary still with a heartbeat. It's a faint one, but the little ball still bouncing on that EKG. So, wouldn't that be something based on what just transpired there if O'Leary was able to turn this into a steal? My, my, my. That was an interesting turn of right there, and to make it even more interesting was the fact that Ian McCauley, the vice for Ontario, started to move that Ontario rock and take it away, and Alan O'Leary's like, whoa, hold on a second now. That's got to go back there, and he used his foot to put it back into place. So that was very interesting. Cochrane had the chance to end it with his first throw, but got that funky bounce off the side, and we still play on here. And where there's a chance, there's hope. So here comes O'Leary, coming down that side, looking to stick around and force Cochrane to make a play, but he is going to miss everything and go through, and a single point for Ontario. So it's a moot point now as they get a single to make the final 7-4. So here's the situation that we've got. Tomorrow, semifinals. It will be Ontario taking on British Columbia. Ontario will be the 1 seed, BC the 4 seed. Now the interesting thing is there, earlier today, British Columbia beat Ontario by a score of 8-2. So there's that. Ontario playing well. They've only lost once, but that one loss was to BC. So BC will have that mental, if you will. And again, you know, sometimes these games with very closely matched teams, that little mental edge can be all the difference. So, again, Ontario the 1 seed, BC the 4. Ontario's only loss was to BC, and it was by a score of 8-2. So, BC, I'm sure, will be counting on that to give them a little bit of an edge. And then in the other game, Manitoba, at an 8-2 record, will be the 2 seed, taking on this Nova Scotia O'Leary rink, who finished at 7-3. So Manitoba the 2 seed, Nova Scotia the 3 seed. In terms of mental edges there, Manitoba absolutely pasted Nova Scotia earlier today by a score of 10-1. So whether or not that comes into play, we don't know, but we will find out tomorrow. So we will sign off for the evening. A great week of curling. 1 day left to go. On behalf of Chuck Calder, Scott McRae, and the crew at 45 North, as well as our Bell-aligned TV1 crew, I'm Scott Squires. Thank you very much for watching. Once again, your final score, Ontario takes first seed overall, and they will move into the semifinal tomorrow as the 1 seed. They defeat Nova Scotia by a score of 7-4. We'll see you tomorrow morning, 9:30 Atlantic time, for the semifinals, and then the Everest Furby Pro-Am, and then championship games at 3 o'clock Atlantic. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Scott Squire saying good night from Digby.